Today we're going to start our full preview of the 2021 NFL Draft as we go school by school. And today's focus is going to be on Northwestern. And to break down that group of prospects, we are now joined by a very special guest, the publisher, managing editor of WildcatReport.com, which is the Northwestern rival site, none other than Louie Vaccher. Louie, you got Lance Medow and Jeff Feagles here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Greatly appreciate the time today. Hope you and yours are safe and healthy. How's everything on your end?
Everything's good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, Louie, good. Good to have you.
Absolutely. Pleasure having you on the program. And let's start with obviously the most notable prospect, given Northwestern had its pro day the other day, and that is offensive lineman Rashawn Slater. Did not play in 2020, so this was really our first opportunity to see him up close and personal. What jumped out to you, Louie, about his production at his pro day that perhaps could solidify him as the number one rated tackle in this year's class?
Yeah, I thought Rashawn had a heck of a day. I mean, he ran a 4.91 at 6'4" and 304 pounds. So that really showed you what kind of speed he has. And then he bench press. He got 33 reps, 33-inch vertical. I think you saw what kind of athlete he is. You know, he's got those feet for tackles. I think the big thing with him, they don't like his arm length. He's got 33-inch arms, which is kind of short for tackles. So there is some talk moving him inside. But I think he proved he's got the feet and athleticism to play out at tackle if you need him to. So I think he had a tremendous day. He's going to be either the first or second tackle taken.
Louie, I got to see a little bit of his film from yesterday, and one thing that was really impressive to me, aside from the 33, these guys, if you don't do 30 or more, you're a weak leak, right? I mean, it just seems to be the way it is these days. But talk about his footwork. I was watching some of the drills that he was doing, particularly on some of his pass sets, and wow, I mean, that impressed me a lot. And I understand that, we had a guy here with the Giants and had small arms, and they put him inside. They made him a guard. But, with that type of feet, he certainly could play outside, or if he is inside, he would do damage on pulling plays and things like that. So, to me, I think it's a lot about him not playing last year, where he has gone between that year and here and how much he's gotten better. But to me, there are some people saying that he might be taken above Sewell, but I think regardless, both those players are going to be really good. And I think what I'm trying to say here is I was very, very impressed with his footwork. By far was one of the things that I thought was the best out of him.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I saw the drills too, and boy, he's got the feet of a ballerina
fast.
for such a big guy. Yeah, the kick step and everything. He's got some quick feet, and the thing about him, he's fine moving inside the guard or tackle. I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he made a pretty emphatic statement, I'm a tackle. I think I'm the best tackle in the draft. So I think he wants to be out of tackle. He's happy to play inside, and that versatility, I think, does him well. He's a guy that played 2 years at right tackle for Northwestern. He started his first game as a true freshman, which is a pretty rare thing in the Big Ten. And then he played 1 year on the left side at left tackle. And, I think he can play anywhere you want him to play. But you're right. That footwork, I think, his athleticism is what separates him and makes him such an outstanding prospect.
Well, and I think that's a great point, Louie. Versatility in this league is so key, especially with the way that injuries play out. He may be forced to move into another position at some point throughout the course of his career. Speaking of other things that jump out, you just went over where he was lined up throughout his collegiate career. The fact that he did not surrender a sack at all in 2019. I know a lot of people are also referring to the fact that he went up against Chase Young and he handled his own. When you look back at just his level of performance, regardless of where he was lined up, why was he such a consistent force, especially when it came to pass protection?
I mean, he was that way from day one. Like I said, it's extremely rare for a guy to come in as a true freshman and start in the Big Ten. And he was at right tackle from day one. He's so consistent. I think that's a big thing they look for. There are guys that can have good games, and they'll have a letdown, or they'll go up against an elite player and have a rough day or something like that. Rashawn Slater, he was outstanding day in, day out. I think that the game he had against Chase Young in 2019 really opened people's eyes to him, but it's something that he'd done for 3 years to that point at Northwestern. He was just such a consistently excellent player. You never had to worry about his performance. And it's funny because he was a guy that was really overlooked coming out of high school. He played at Sugar Land, Texas, Clements High School, and I think they won 3 games in his 3 years on the varsity. They were a bad program, and I think he got overlooked. And Northwestern, Kansas, and I think Illinois were his only Power 5 offers. So he was a guy that really, a lot of people overlooked, was kind of an underdog, and he came in here and started on day one. I think it surprised everybody, and he's been, just a consistent player ever since.
What? Go ahead.
In terms of some of the other prospects that I think are notable throughout the course of this Northwestern class, I want to jump to the defensive side of the ball because actually you could argue, Louie, and we'll get into it, this may be one of the deepest Northwestern classes we've seen in quite some time. There's projections that more people will be drafted from Northwestern this year than we've seen in many years. But Greg Newsome, I think, is the other notable player, the 6'1 junior cornerback. He certainly has the size, maybe not necessarily the most opportunistic player with just one career interception. But before we get into his play, from what I was reading, from what I heard, many people were down on his performance at this pro day, Louie. They said that in the positional drills, he just didn't jump out to them, maybe looked a little sluggish. From what you've seen, from what you've heard, how fair is it to say that his pro day was a bit disappointing based on what people were anticipating?
Well, honestly, I haven't seen a whole lot of that. I thought he had, he ran that 4.39, which really, I think, opened some eyes, and he had a 40-inch vertical leap. So I think he answered any questions about his athleticism. Obviously, they didn't have media there, so I wasn't there to see. I haven't seen a whole lot of negativity around his drills or things like that, so I really can't speak to that. I mean, to me, he's 6 foot. You measure just over 6 foot and 192 pounds. That's awfully big for a corner, and to run a 4.39 like he did. And then you look at his tape, and he was just outstanding last season. I think, you look at, I've seen so many stats about he was the, most productive corner. He gave up the fewest receptions and all that kind of stuff all year. I think he's been really rocketing up the draft boards in the last few months here since the end of the season. So I think he probably got himself a first round. That's what I've been hearing, that he was projected to be a first rounder, possibly anyway. And I thought he had a good day yesterday. I guess I haven't seen a whole lot of negative things. I'll just say that.
Well, one thing you did do is you saw him play, and I think that you could take a lot out of that. And, of course, there's going to be a lot of teams that's really what they're going to be able to have to go on this year is watching the game tape from 2020. What was it that set him over the top, you think, of getting him in? Maybe if he's kind of one of these cusp players, it might be a second rounder or moves him up to the first rounder. Is it his physicality? Is it his ability to play anywhere on the field? What do you see that's going to bring him up to that first round pick, if you will, Louie?
Yeah, I think it's that tape. He was an outstanding, productive player at Northwestern, and he's a very physical guy. He is a guy that will come up and hit people. He is a very confident, very aggressive player. He kind of gave Northwestern, I'd say definitely their secondary, kind of their whole defense, their swagger last year. Northwestern was, I think, number 5 in the country scoring defense last year. They had the number 1 pass efficiency defense, and he was a big part of that. He was a guy, he took on David Bell of Purdue, and, not only he got the better of the battle one-on-one. This was the number 1 receiver in the Big Ten last year, but he was, talking trash, and you'd see him, he was kind of talking to the whole Purdue sideline. That's kind of the player he is. He's very aggressive, very confident, bordering on cocky guy. That's how he plays, and he's very physical. He will come up and hit people. I think the only question with him is durability. He was, even last year, he only played 6 games. He never played a full season. He had a couple injuries, so that's something they'll look at. But the fact that he came in at, 6 foot and 192 pounds, he has really transformed his body. He was such a long, skinny kid when he came in here as a freshman a few years ago. So he's a guy that's really bulked up and took advantage of the training table in the weight room, that's for sure.
What were the injuries that he had? Were they serious stuff or just, kind of
No, yeah, they weren't anything like an ACL or anything like that. He had, I think it was a collarbone one year. I can't remember the other one, but it wasn't, it was just a broken bone. It's just kind of a, freak kind of thing. It wasn't anything I think they'll get too concerned about.
We're talking with Louie Vaccher, the publisher managing editor of WildcatReport.com, the Northwestern rival site. As far as Slater and Newsome go, Louie, from knowing them on and off the field, character-wise, how would you best classify them in terms of their locker room presence and what they could bring perhaps to a team even off the field?
Oh, yeah, I don't think there'll be any questions about that. They're both smart guys. They're very articulate. I think character-wise, they're both leaders, all those kinds of things. Rashawn Slater is a very kind of cerebral guy. Even if you saw some of the clips, I was laughing the other day. They had when he set his squat record or whatever it was, he was there doing his squats with glasses on. And I thought that was like such a Northwestern thing right there. But, that's who he is. He's a very, articulate guy, very smart. And he's a guy, so last year, he sat out. And not only did he watch all the Northwestern games, but he would go through and watch film every day. And what he would do is cut up highlights for individual players. He'd cut up the video himself and send that to them last season with, like, some pointers on how he thought they could improve and things like that. That's the kind of a teammate and a leader he is. And Newsome, like I talked about, he's a guy that he's a fearless player. He's very aggressive, very confident, and he's going to bring that into whatever locker room he brings. He's going to bring some of that swagger. He's a confident guy. He's a guy that kind of leads by example more, I think. But I don't think there will be any, off the field kind of questions about those two guys.
Well, those two guys are the top prospects in the Northwestern class. Then I think it becomes a question mark about who else could be selected, where may be some of the gems in this group. So I want to get your perspective, at least on the defensive side of the ball. Let's stay there because we were focusing on Newsome. You've got the defensive lineman, Ernest Brown, senior, who was hurt in 2019, seemed to have a bounce-back campaign this past year. And then also in the secondary, J.R. Pace, another senior who had 1 year in which he had 4 interceptions. As far as those two guys go, where do you see perhaps their ceiling on the NFL level?
Yeah, I tell you, Ernest Brown was a guy, I thought he would run a little faster yesterday. I think he was over 5 at he's like 6'4", 270, and he came in at 5.01. So I thought he'd run a little bit better. He's an outstanding athlete. He's a guy that hasn't, he wasn't a starter until this year. He was like a situational guy. He's a quick twitch guy they put on the edge. He was their fastest corner pass rusher. So he didn't put up big numbers. And I think he gained weight over his career, and he's finally able to, kind of anchor down against the run this year, which is why he finally earned a starting job. And he'll be at the combine too, so he'll get a chance to improve his numbers and show what he can do in drills like that. Because he's a guy that's a very good athlete. I just think, we'll see if it was just a bad day yesterday, if he could put up some bigger numbers at the combine. Pace is a guy that, 3+ year starter. He's been the leader back there. He's kind of a ball hawk. He's had a lot of interceptions in his career. He's sort of the, if Greg Newsome was the swagger of the team, I think J.R. Pace was the leader back there, made sure everybody was aligned and was kind of the quarterback of the defense. So he's a guy, I think he ran in the 4.7s yesterday, and I know Pat Fitzgerald said that someone dropped a weight on his foot last week, so that might have affected him a little bit, so we'll see. So they didn't disclose who that was. But and the other guy, I think, is Patty Fisher, who will get a look. He ran a little slow yesterday, too. He's not a guy that's going to put up big combine numbers, but he's a 4-year starter. He's made 400 tackles in his career, had 11 forced fumbles, led the nation in both of those categories, the leading active player in both of those categories. So he's a guy that has a lot of tape to put down. I think I don't think he'll get drafted necessarily, but he'll get a look in somebody's camp for sure.
Did he play any of the special teams? I know he was a starter, so I don't know what the Northwestern's policy was that. Because obviously if a guy is going to come in, a late rounder, a free agent, he's going to be required to play some specials. Did he do any of that at Northwestern?
Yeah, not much. I think he played a little bit. Was he on a punt, receive, punt? Yeah, he played a little bit of punt teams and stuff like that, but not too much because, like I said, he was a 4-year starter. He was out there starting every game. Of
course. Well, when you see him, tell him to get ready. He's going to have to play some special teams.
Oh, he's been willing to do it. That's a guy he's a football player through and through. He's from Katy, Texas, and he's a guy that is born and bred to play football. That's what he does.
Well, it sounds like he's around the football quite a bit if he's 400 tackles and leading the country in forced fumbles. So a kind of guy you like to have on your defensive side of the football, taking that football away for sure. So it sounds like a good guy in the locker room too. You can't ever have enough of those.
Oh, yeah. He was the leader of the defense, no question. And, a 4-year starter, I think, speaks for itself. He was a captain for 2 of those years and just a tremendous leader. And, he's not a very vocal guy, but he's the guy that led by example. And number 42 was out there, every single game. He was such a positive force for the Wildcats the last 4 years.
Louie, there's usually a lot of depth at wide receiver in every single draft class, and the Giants could very well be interested in adding a wide receiver. I'm not saying that these guys are necessarily going to go extremely high, but Northwestern does have 2, and I'm just curious what you've seen specifically out of Ramad Chokiao-Bowman, because he seemed to have a pretty productive season this past year, and whether or not that's somebody that could sneak on a roster come the draft or maybe as a free agent.
Yeah, he had a tremendous senior year. He's a guy that he was a kind of a situational guy, rotation guy for his first 3 years. And he and Peyton Ramsey, grad transfer quarterback this year, really had some kind of a chemistry this year. And he had a tremendous senior year. He made a lot of 50-50 balls. He came down with them, a lot of contested catches. He's a physical kind of, possession receiver. So he's a guy that I think could get a look. I think he ran a 4.78 yesterday, so it's not outstanding for a wide receiver, but he's 6 foot, he's over 200 pounds, so he's got some potential there, I think, as a possession sort of receiver. But the other guy, Riley Lees, I think, is a guy that, he was a punt returner as well. He's a pretty good punt returner. He can make some people miss. He's kind of a playmaker. They had him in the slot position a lot, and he would make a lot of catches over the middle of the field, move the sticks kind of guy. He ran a 4.47 yesterday, which is pretty good. He's an outstanding athlete. He's a guy that, he was a quarterback in high school. Took him a year to, as a red shirt, kind of learn the position, and he got a lot better over his career at wide receiver. So he's a guy I think that could get a look just because, people are always looking for return men and things like that. So I'm sure he'll get into a camp and get a chance to show what he can do too.
We're talking with Louie Vaccher, publisher, managing editor of WildcatReport.com, Northwestern rival site. Louie, last one for me before we let you go. Just want to circle back to Rashawn Slater because the Giants do pick 11th overall, and there are some chatter that he could be potential option for the Giants. He also could be in the mix when they're on the board as one of their highly ranked guys. The Giants have invested in a lot of young offensive linemen, at least in last year's draft. If he were to come to an NFL team year one, how much do you think he's the type of player that you slide in, he's a starter day one, he can immediately contribute, as opposed to somebody that may needs a little bit more polish based on what you've seen?
I think he's a contributor from day one. I think he's a guy that you can plug in there for the next 10 years. He's that kind of player. He did the same. I think the jump from high school to the Big Ten is probably a little bit bigger, and as for a kid, I talked to him about that, and he thought that leap was a bigger one, and he's a guy that came in there and started on day one. Now he talks about himself as a much more polished offensive lineman. He's faced guys like Chase Young. He's played, he started in the Big Ten for 3 years and faced some of the best defensive linemen in the country. He's got that confidence. He's got that versatility where you can play a lot of different positions. He's a smart kid. He's going to work hard, and he's got those feet. That's something you can't teach. So I think he's a guy that could come in and be a starter on day one. And, will he be an all-pro kind of guy? That's hard to project, but I think he can certainly be a starter, and I think he's a guy that you can plug in there, like I said, for the next decade as a starter on your offensive line.
Something tells me the footwork may also be a product of having a dad that played in the NBA in Reggie Slater, so maybe he passed on those genes in terms of another
absolutely.
sport. Yeah,
yeah, he talks about that a lot too. The first thing I talking about, how did he get here from, Clements High School, and now he's a first-round pick, and the first thing he talked about was his dad, who, he was like a 6'4" center from Wyoming, and he ended up with a 13-year pro career, bounced around all overseas, played for, 6 or 7 NBA teams, and, he worked hard. He was a lunch bucket kind of guy and kind of a pro's pro. And, Rashawn talks about he adopted that mentality, that's where he got his work ethic, and that's what made him a first-round pick.
There you go. He is Louie Vaccher, publisher, managing editor of WildcatReport.com, the Northwestern rival site. Louie, greatly appreciate the time and the insight.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to talking to you down the road.
Thanks, Louie.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun.